Book of Heaven, Volume 13. 16th to the 22nd of November 1921. Page 48 to 54. November 16, 1921. Sin is the chain that binds man, and Jesus wanted to be bound in order to break his chains. This morning my always lovable Jesus made himself seen all bound. Bound were his hands, his feet, his waist, and a double iron chain was coming down from his neck. He was bound so tightly that his divine person was deprived of motion. What a harsh position, such as to make even stones cry. And my highest good told me, "My daughter, during the course of my passion all the other pains competed with each other, but they would alternate. One would give the place to another. Almost like sentries, they would mount guard to do the worst to me, and to boast about having been better than the other. But the ropes were never taken away from me. From the moment I was taken up to Mount Calvary I remained always bound. Rather, they kept adding more and more ropes and chains for fear that I might escape, and to make more fun of me. But how many pains, confusions, humiliations and falls did these chains procure me? However, know that in these chains there was a great mystery and great expiation. As man begins to fall into sin, he remains bound with the chains of his own sin. If it is grave, they are iron chains; if venial, they are chains of rope. So, as he tries to walk in good, he feels the hindrance of the chains, and his step remains hindered. This hindrance he feels wears him out, debilitates him, and leads him to new falls. If he works, he feels hindrance in his hands and remains almost as if he had no hands to do good. In seeing him bound like this, passions make feast and say, "The victory is ours," and from the king he is, they render him slave of brutal passions. How abominable man is in the state of sin! And I, in order to break his chains, wanted to be bound and never be without chains, so as to keep my chains ever ready to break his. And when the blows and the shoves would make me fall, I would stretch my hands toward him to untie him and make him free again. As he was saying this, I saw almost all peoples bound by chains, in such a way as to arouse pity, and I prayed Jesus to touch their chains with his chains, so that, at the touch of his chains, those of the creatures would be all shattered. November 19, 1921. The two supports of Jesus in Gethsemane. In order to know the truths, it is necessary to have the will, the desire to know them. The truth is simple. I was keeping company with my Jesus who was agonizing in the Garden of Gethsemane, and as much as I could, I compassionated him, I pressed him tightly to my heart, trying to wipe his mortal sweats. And my sorrowful Jesus, with faint and expiring voice, told me, "My daughter, my agony in the garden was hard and painful, maybe more painful than that of the cross." In fact, if that was the fulfillment and the triumph over all, here in the garden it was the beginning, and sufferings are felt more at the beginning than when they are ended. But in this agony the most harrowing pain was when all sins came before me, one by one. My humanity comprehended all their enormity, and each crime carried the mark, death to a God, armed with sword to kill me. Before the divinity, sin appeared to me as so very horrifying and more horrible than death itself. Just in comprehending what sin means, I felt I was dying, and I did really die. I cried out to the Father, but he was inexorable. Not even one was there to help me, so as not to let me die. I cried out to all creatures to have pity on me, but in vain. So, my humanity languished, and I was about to receive the last blow of death. But do you know who prevented the execution and sustained my humanity from dying? The first was my inseparable Mama. In hearing me ask for help, she flew to my side and sustained me, and I leaned my right arm on her. Almost dying, I looked at her, and I found in her the immensity of my will intact, without ever a break between my will and hers. My will is life, and since the will of the Father was immovable and death was coming to me from creatures, another creature, who enclosed the life of my will, gave me life. And here is my Mama who, in the portent of my will, conceived me and gave me birth in time, now giving me life for the second time to let me accomplish the work of redemption. Then I looked to my left, and I found the little daughter of my will. I found you as the first, followed by the other daughters of my will. Since I wanted my mama with me as the first link of mercy, through which we were to open the doors to all creatures, I wanted to lean my right arm on her. And I wanted you as the first link of justice, to prevent it from unloading itself upon all creatures as they deserve. Therefore I wanted to lean my left arm on you, so that you might sustain it together with me. With these two supports I felt life come back to me, and as if I had not suffered anything, with firm step, I went to meet my enemies. In all the pains that I suffered during my passion, many of which were capable of giving me death, these two supports never left me. And when they saw me nearly dying, with my own will which they contained, they sustained me, as though giving me many sips of life. Oh, prodigies of my will! Who can ever count them and calculate their value? This is why I love so much one who lives in my will. I recognize my portrait in her, my noble features. I feel my own breath, my voice, and if I did not love her I would defraud myself. I would be like a father without offspring, without the noble cortege of his court, and without the crown of his children. And if I did not have the offspring, the court and the crown, how could I call myself a king? My kingdom is formed by those who live in my will, and from this kingdom, I choose the mother, the queen, the children, the ministers, the army, the people. I am everything for them, and they are all for me. Afterwards, I was thinking about what Jesus had told me, and I said to myself, how can this be put into practice? And Jesus, returning, added, my daughter, in order to know the truths, it is necessary to have the will, the desire to know them. Imagine a room in which the shutters are closed. No matter how much sun there may be outside, the room remains always in the dark. Now, opening the shutters means wanting light. But this is not enough, if one does not take advantage of the light to reorder the room, dust it, and put himself to work, so as to not kill the light which is given, and become ungrateful. In the same way, it is not enough to have the will to know the truths if, at the light of the truth which illuminates, one does not try to dust himself of his own weaknesses, reorder himself according to the light of the truth he knows, and put himself to work together with the light of truth, making of it his own substance, in such a way that the light of the truth which he has absorbed may shine through his mouth, through his hands, through his bearing. It would be as if he killed the truth, and by not putting it into practice, it would be like remaining in total disorder before the light. Poor room full of light, but all messed up, upside down, in total disorder, with a person in it who does not take the care of reordering it. How pitiful would it not be? Such is one who knows the truths, and does not put them into practice. However, know that simplicity enters into all truths as the first nourishment. If the truths were not simple, they would not be light, and they could not penetrate into human minds to enlighten them. And where there is no light, objects cannot be distinguished. Simplicity is not only light, but it is like the air that one breathes which, though it cannot be seen, gives respiration to all. And if it wasn't for the air, the earth and everyone would remain without motion. Therefore, if the virtues, the truths, do not carry the mark of simplicity, they will be without light and without air. November 22, 1921. The acts done in the divine will are light. The pain that most pierced Jesus in his passion was pretense. Continuing in my usual state, and keeping vigil almost all night, my thought flew very often to my prisoner Jesus. And he made himself seen in thick darkness, such that I could feel his labored breath, the touch of his person, but I could not see him. So I tried to fuse myself in his most holy will, doing my usual acts of compassion and reparation, and a ray of light, brighter than sun, came out from within my interior and was reflected on the face of Jesus. At that ray, his most holy face was lightened, and as daylight arose, darkness was dispelled, and I was able to cling to his knees. Then he told me, "My daughter, the acts done in my will are daylight for me. And if man with his sins surrounds me with darkness, these acts, more than solar rays, defend me from darkness, surround me with light, and take me by the hand to make me known to creatures for who I am. This is why I love so much one who lives in my will, because in my will she can give me everything, she defends me from everyone, and I feel like giving her everything, enclosing in her all the goods which I should give to all the others. Suppose that the sun had a reason, and that plants were rational, and of their own will, they refused the light and the heat of the sun, and did not love to fecundate and produce fruits, and that only one plant would receive the light of the sun with love, and would want to give to the sun all the fruits which the other plants do not want to produce. Would it not be fair that the sun, withdrawing its light from all the other plants, would pour all of its light and heat upon that plant? I think so. Now, what does not happen to the sun, because it does not have a reason, can happen between the soul and myself. After he said this, he disappeared. Then he came back and added, "My daughter, the pain which pierced me the most during my passion was the affectation of the Pharisees. They faked justice, but they were the most unjust. They faked sanctity, regularity, order, and they were the most perverted, outside of any rule, and in full disorder. And while they pretended to honor God, they were honoring themselves, their self-interest, their own comfort. Therefore, light could not enter into them, because their fake manners were closing the doors to it, and pretense was the key which, closing them to death with double locks, blocked obstinately even a few glimmers of light, to the point that Pilate, idolatrous, found more light than the very Pharisees, because all he did and said did not start from pretense, but, at most, from fear. I feel more drawn toward the most perverted sinner, but not false, than to those who are good but false. Oh, how disgusted I am by one who apparently does good, pretends to be good, prays, but nurses evil and self-interest inside, and while his lips are praying, his heart is far away from me. And in the very act of doing good, he is thinking about how to satisfy his brutal passions. Then, a man who is false in the good which he apparently does and says is incapable of giving light to others, since he has closed the doors to it. Therefore they act as incarnate devils, who many times attract men under the appearance of good. In seeing this good, men let themselves be drawn in, but when they feel most secure, they make them fall into graver sins. Oh, how much safer are the temptations under appearance of sin, than those under appearance of good. In the same way, it is safer to deal with perverted people than with good people, but false. How much poison do they not hide? How many souls do they not poison? If it wasn't for pretenses and all made themselves known for what they are, the root of evil would be removed from the face of the earth, and all would be disillusioned.